commons, the finance, the trust as key enablers, not only to implement the pact at the local level, but to transform the international power landscape.
So a shared vulnerability, a shared opportunity to take risks is one way, as Emilia said, to rebuild those relationships and take down some of those power dynamics.
Question again the basics of economy and finance.
And I think that's the real shift that I've seen in the last 10 years. We didn't have a discourse that was dealing about caring, sharing, solidarity, feminist politics.
There will be no human rights or social justice. There will be no right to the city or democracy without the commons.
We're talking about changing the power of me to the power of we.
Welcome everyone. Buenos días. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. My name is Adrià Duarte, and I am pleased to welcome you all to the third session of these future envisioning exercises. Some of you have already participated last week in the exercises on reclaiming the commons and redefining economy and finance. But for some of you, you're joining for the first time this exercise, so we will take you all through the process to make sure we are all on the same page. The future envisioning exercises mandated by the UCLG policy councils are a mechanism to unfold the pact for the future. They are spaces of dialogue and co-creation in which the UCLG political leadership, together with organized civil society and partners articulated in the UCLG town halls, will build bridges to unfold the pact. The conclusions reached in these discussions will inform the deliberations of UCLG statutory bodies and our contributions to the UN General Assembly's revision of the 2030 Agenda at the SDG Summit, as well as to the Summit of the Future, building the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. During the sessions and in the process of co-creation that will follow, we will try to explore the importance of trust, and especially which are the challenges that trust faces and how we can regain it. We believe that trust is necessary to deliver on the transformations and commitments contained in the Pact for the Future and the UN Common Agenda. The agenda for today's session is as follows. We will start by setting the scene, followed by a first consultations on the notion of trust from the Mentimeter, in which we will invite you, all participants, to participate through your cell phones, tablets, and computers. We will then have two speeches relating freedom of expression, public debate, and challenges to trust in institutions, from governments to academia. This will be followed by three contributions from policy councillors, town halls, and stakeholders on how to regain trust. We will also discover in focus a partner process to regain trust before moving on to the Agora, the open dialogue space that is at the heart of this space, and we invite you all to take part of it. Without further ado, I thank you again for your participations today, and I am pleased to give the floor to our Secretary General, Emilia Saiz, to kick off the sessions.
Well, thank you very much, Adrià, for this introduction, and to the whole team for pulling this together, and to all the participants for joining us in what for us is a very, very critical exercise. It's not just one more conversations, which are important enough. We need to discuss, we need dialogue in these times of polarization. But for us, it is a true exercise of policy making, of prioritization in our work program, and unpacking the pact that is transforming the commitments and the narrative that we have put together during 2 years in that Pact for the Future of Humanity into actual actions that will foster transformation. And you know, as the pact is saying, we are facing dramatic setbacks on peace, on democracy. We see how polarization is growing, how racism and sexism, ageism, ableism are now in jeopardy. More than ever before, in fact. You see whole countries banning women from going to school. We see countries that have known women's rights as one of their core principles, now losing many of those rights. around reproduction, for instance, in a pace and a manner that we didn't think would be possible after the achievements that we have made. And we have also seen how there is growing ignorance about how institutions are pulled together, but also a great mistrust in what the institutions are able to do, should be doing, can do, and who is the reliable source of information, what is the reference. And so in this context, the pact for humanity that local and regional governments are pushing forward together with organized civil society, all of our partners, many of them here with us today through the town hall process, is meant to be a token of hope and to demonstrate that other ways are possible. And so if other ways are possible, and if we kind of know what we need to regain trust and to strengthen democracy, why isn't it working? I mean, we have been promoting participatory democracy for several decades now. We have been trying to work towards gender equality as much as we can. We have put in place many policies. Also, the architecture of the SDGs have been very significant in the work that we do. And yet, trust is one of those pieces that we are losing, and we're losing very, very, very fast. And so for us, this entry point will be critical to understand how we need to reshape the institutions, how do we need to redefine democracy, and in particular local democracy as cornerstones for the governance system at territorial, national, and international level. And it will also need to help us identify not only the challenges, but also the opportunities that the current information system, the social media, and other tools are providing us. And this is why we are using this organized structure, this methodology that Adria has presented to you, to ensure that in our visioning documents, we encapsulate all the discussions that we have, and that we can make concrete proposals to our political leadership to discuss further those difficult areas that we might not all agree about, and identify concrete actions to enhance in a significant manner actions around some of the keys to regain trust and enhance democracy. So not an easy task, a very ambitious objective, but I think the group that is joining us here today, together with the political leadership that will be discussing these proposals in an in-person session during our executive board, are strong enough and legitimate enough to help us advance this discussion. So I am encouraged by it. While I have to confess that the local level of political leadership is very, very aware of this challenge and is dealing with it every day in their very own performance as local leaders. We hope some of these stories will come up in the discussions that we have today. But before we go into the discussions and to the presentations that we have ready, for the group, allow us to take the pulse of this meeting, to see what you think, and to already put in perspective some of the issues that we want to tackle in this session. And in order to do that, I know that Amanda Fletti will be helping me from our team in the World Secretariat and coordinator of our Committee on Social Inclusion. Amanda, we are in your hands to guide us through the Mentimeter.
Thank you, Emilia. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Welcome to the Mentimeter exercise. That would be an interactive consultation to get your ideas, your thoughts about the topic of today, trust. You will have all the instruction on the chat. Please connect through your device. There is the website, there is the code. I will wait a couple of minutes so you can all get connected to the Menti exercise. The idea is also to hear from you on the most important values we want to defend through the session today. Maybe are we ready to start? Yes, I think it's fine. Okay, let's start. So the first question is, what word idea comes to mind when you think of trust? So you can write up to 3 ideas, thinking about your everyday realities, professional experience. Please feel free to share your thought on that. So we can see we have corruption, policy, democracy, corruption again, community, dialogue, legitimacy, fake news. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, not very surprising from my perspective. I think we all feel corruption is a very big part of the equation in mistrust, and the issue of fake news, I confess, I thought would be more prominent, because I truly think we are in a kind of post-truth era. But I also like the positive notes around transparency, dialogue, honesty, and community, because I don't know how you feel, Amanda, but I think those are the keys that we will need to draw on, the spirit that we have been building on, and a lot of the legacy that we have at the local level to regain that trust.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we can see that what I've been trying to advance through the renewal of a social contract, also trying to build new, when we say co-creation of the cities, all these values that we are seeing right now were at the basis of the thinking on how we should lead the policies at the local level. So maybe we could go now to the second question. What are the main threats that currently exist to building trust? So we know we have mentioned a lot. We have only 3, so please prioritize the 3 you think are the most important challenge regarding trust and how we could build it. So fake news. Again, Emilia, if you want to comment also.
Here they come, yeah. I'm not sure that fake news is the only challenge, and I am certain that the participants also do not see it that way. But there are, I think, inequality, which is not coming up as strong. I mean, the entrenched inequality that is accepted as part of our model, I think, is also one of the main threats to trust of people. People feel, I just come back from New York, where we have been discussing for 2 days access to healthcare, to universal healthcare. And the reality is that a very big part of the population of the world has not access to that. So I think injustice and sectorism, as is said there, and inequality is a very important part of this equation. But I see many other things coming up now with the strong words as totalitarianism, indeed. Amanda, back to you.
Yes, actually, we saw also violence, lack of justice, and we know that's also led to have like more responses from authority, from totalitarianism that you were mentioning, Emilia. So I think that we're totally sharing the threat here, because we know, and especially from the Committee on Human Rights, we know that there is like this easy way to respond to this issue. But we don't want to have the easy pathway. We want to build the difficult one.
And I also see something that is coming up, where I hope Jessica, who is going to be kicking off presentations later as journalist, I'm sure she will want to address. But I see one of the feedbacks is that there is mistrust in the social media or information. I think the mistrust is general. Everything that is organized seems to be something that people do not trust anymore. And so there are these alternative communities that are being built around these new tools. When I was doing my unfinished PhD on the impact of technology in democracy, these communities were starting to shape, and we were hoping that they will be a great tool for democracy, but they have become very isolated. So I think the mistrust is general, is towards organized journalism, is towards institutions, is towards everything that is very formal has a kind of mistrust now, and I like fear coming up here because it's something that we certainly need to address. Amanda, we have one more question, right?
Yes, let's go to the last question. We would like to ask you to, from 1 to 10, how much trust do you have in the following institutions? So this is also like a more personal question. It's the same, you can refer to personal experience or professional experience on the way you feel that we can trust the following institutions. So we have the medias, we have the academia, we have the religious authorities, we have the NGOs, corporations, local governments, national governments, the UN and its ecosystem. So we are seeing that there is a strong support of the UN and its ecosystem. Coming second position from academia.
Well, you know, I'm very happy about the results around academia. I think it's very, very relevant, but I have to say that I'm not sure that this group reflects the reality of society in this sense, because I have just read these surveys a couple of months ago on the trust of youth in academia. So people, you know, from 15 to 25, 30 years old. And academia is not the reference, certainly not. Science is not the reference. But I am happy that this group sees it this way as well, and that we also show that we are true multilateralists at heart, with the trust in the UN being there as well. But I guess this issue on who is our reference and who do we trust is extremely important, and it's something that we need to look at in a deeper way, I think, than we are doing now. So very interesting results that I hope Jessica can pick up on as we go to the next segment. Anything else from your side, Amanda?
Yeah, I just want to share that what we have been advancing from UCLG is that the dialogue between all those actors is the way to construct maybe like a good pathway, you know, to fight inequality, discrimination, and build trust. So we hope that there will be, from this dialogue with the UN, with the academia, with the NGOs, with the local government, that we will find this way to build trust. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm convinced of the same thing, and I think many of the voices that are invited to this discussion today will also be making this point. It's something that we have also heard in our discussions about the commons. I mean, we will need to make choices, and we will need to leave back some of the parts of the model that have not been working, and the acceptance of inequality, the acceptance of measurements like as GDP, as how we see development, the acceptance that we need a new generation of human rights will be very critical for people to regain trust in the institutions. And this is what the pact is proposing. Some of the things are far-reaching, you know, our proposal around, you know, how do you articulate global citizenship will be a long-term commitment, but there are things that we can also easily put forward at the level of local and regional governments, and being very consistent around equality measures and non-discrimination, but also corruption will be extremely critical. So I'm going now to Jessica. I'm so happy that you're with us. Jessica Bridger. Jessica is a journalist and an urbanist. And as you know, we are trying to put these two things together and make sure that we enhance the dialogue with media. And Jessica was as kind as to facilitate the dialogue with our political representatives during our retreat earlier in the year. As you know, there is a red thread in everything we do, Jessica. We try to connect the dots. So from that open conversation now to a space where we hope we can influence policy making, I'm giving you the floor to share with us. I mean, we know that from where you're sitting, you will not have all the answers, but you have a very good view of how people feel about what is happening, what their perspective is. And I am sure that you're faced with many choices in your day-to-day job as a journalist telling the story of cities. So we're very pleased you are with us. Welcome, Jessica. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Amelia, and thank you to UCLG for inviting me to join today's future thinking exercise on trust. And I'm an urbanist and a journalist, and I work across public, private, and institutional projects. And I am a professional journalist, and I undertake community communications and strategy projects that are related to cities and urban development. And I believe very strongly in making information accessible, readable, and understood. And those are some of the keys to what makes information trustworthy, obviously. And I think that largely we hear a lot as, consumers of news, as just people in the world, that the idea of trust is failing. But I want to challenge that by saying that trust is actually being challenged and falling rather than failing. Failure implies that things have reached a point of no return. But I don't think we're there yet. If we get there, that's another issue. But our institutions are now struggling from a loss in trust, which by nature undermines them. And I think that we have myriad challenges to trust in various facets of society, from trust in media, government, business, but also trust in broader community. I think Amelia was picking up on some of this and getting at kind of the promise of a lot of social media, but what we've ended up with is a lot more problematic. And we also have problems with trust in individuals and technology itself. But it's how we respond to these challenges as leaders, as experts, as journalists, as policymakers that will define who we trust and how that evolves. And what are the opportunities and ways to find and build new ways to express trust and to build trust. And what do those opportunities get us in terms of issues like community or dialogue or responsibility? So how can we use this kind of crisis point, these challenges, to build opportunity? And recognize that trust isn't static, right? Trust and public perception have a way of changing as society changes. So we could look at the financial crisis or COVID-19 pandemic as examples of things that changed the public's perception of trust in government, in media, in experts. And we can understand that trust is something that can be influenced and that changes. So as much as trust is now falling, it can also rise again. And it can rise in one way and fall in others. So it can rise in government and fall in business. And the converse is also true. So the introduction for today mentioned Edelman Trust, and I want to mention them again. So Edelman Trust works on issues of trust centered on 4 institutions: government, business, media, and NGOs. They've spent 20 years looking at trust, and they outline trust as follows, and I'm quoting from their 20 Years of Trust publication. Trust is a predictor of whether stakeholders will find you credible in the future, will embrace innovations you introduce, and will enthusiastically support or defend you. That's the best justification of why trust is so essential that I've ever heard. Because if we want to achieve things, whether it's a new piece of legislation, a new park, a new cancer treatment drug, publish an article about an innovation, we must be trusted as mayors, as journalists, as researchers, as CEOs. Many societies have become so polarized that trust has shifted as being held in institutions like government and media to bubbles of like-minded people, fragments of society that echo themselves, people like me, that seem credible and trustworthy. at heart, when we can talk about this, I think this is where it becomes very interesting, that becomes very local, right? Because if it's people like me, it's people in my friend group, it's people who are my neighbors, it's people who look like me, it's people who think like me. But are they actually trustworthy? What accountability is obvious on the internet or in conversation? How about a full fact check or footnotes? Where does information come from? So for me, as a member of the media, and as someone who works at large with those same 4 institutions on a lot of different communications projects, I often ask myself, how can we move forward? How can we turn the challenges to trust into opportunities? How can we communicate in a way that builds trust, as well as accountability and transparency, which are the natural companions of trust? We are called upon to build open, accountable, and transparent responses to the challenges to trust. So we know that some things are obvious. Better education, community engagement, regulation, those are givens. But if people want to trust their peer group, those that they find share the same values, the same background, and more, how can we enable then coalitions and coherence across groups that are open and over more embrace difference? I want to propose that cities, by nature, are a perfect environment with the potential to build trust by building these coalitions, by building community, by bringing people like me into a broader and broader definition through guided intervention. So harmony and agreement in cities, in online forums, exist alongside conflict and disagreement. And we have to see that it's not black or white, but it's where we can get harmony and conflict to work together to change opinions. And that's the way that I think, from my role as a journalist, today's polarization and fragmentation can split that up. But perhaps underneath that, there's actually a lot of common ground. And cities themselves thrive on trust in institutions, but also from one person to the next, from one neighbor to the next. Cities have to work on trust and accountability. So can cities become a lab for building trust in other parts of society? And that's something that I, in my role as a journalist and as a communicator about cities and urban development, have to believe offers a real way forward.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for this inspiring pitch, I would say, that has really framed even further the discussion. Thank you in particular for bringing this positive approach. Not only that we are not at the point of no return, we don't know where we are going, but we are not there yet, certainly. So it is also our responsibility to change the tide. But also for bringing the positive notion that what we are experiencing is the challenge of trust, and that is a good thing in itself. I mean, every single evolution in our institutions has had to be challenged because the design was not right and it was not answering to the new needs. I think that what we underestimated maybe is how sectoral and fractured the new tools were making us, and these like me people, the influence, the impact that will have. Also because we've been dealing with society and responding from the local government service provision, for instance, there has been a period in time where we have been looking for very targeted audiences. And I think you are right that it is in the very nature of the cities to be that agora, that space, that public space where everybody meets, all the ages, and everybody enjoys that space and uses that space, maybe in a different way, but as much as possible, we should be able to do it together. So we will be taking you up on this lab for building trust notion. I really like that. And I hope that we can work on that together, and that our media for cities can also serve as a tool to this dialogue between journalists and elected officials, as a tool to promote that. So thank you very much for that. We have one more contribution from Carlos Moreno, who is late. So what I am proposing is that we go to the next segment, and that we go to presentations from some of our elected officials and from practitioners within cities. So I'm going to give the floor first to Carola Gunnarsson. Carola Gunnarsson is our Vice President for Europe, but also our Envoy for Freedom, Solidarity, and Fighting Violence Against Political Leaders. Yes, an organization like ours needs such a special envoy, because the cases around harassment and violence are growing critically, and they are impacting who is running for office and how do we deal with democracy when we are in office. And the examples are not limited to certain parts of the world. I mean, this is something that we are experiencing across the board with, you know, different perspectives and approaches, but it is a global problem. So I am very grateful, Special Envoy Vice President, that you are with us. Dear Carola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hello to all of you. Well, Jessica was very positive, and I'm sorry to say that I won't be positive, even if I usually is very positive. Because all over the world, we can see now that politicians, both women and men, are threatened, subjected to violence, and even killed. Hate speech, fake news, verbal and physical abuse are becoming part of the everyday experiences of local and regional representatives. Hate speech and fake news faced by local and regional politicians can take diverse forms, online and offline, such as threats, harassments, abuse, physical and verbal violence, and defamation. National Swedish surveys shows that threats and hatred against elected women and men are increasing, and that expressions are becoming more subtle and increasingly spread through social media. This has various impacts on the working conditions of targeted individuals, in particular those from vulnerable groups. The fact that elected officials are subjected to threats, hatred, and violence because of their political mission risks eroding the democratic system in several ways. On the one hand, it can become more difficult to recruit and retain politicians, and on the other hand, our open society can be negatively affected by, for example, censoring themselves. It sets out their implications and effects on their working conditions. In various ways, the voices for a democratic society based on human rights and inclusion are silenced. This is a global, increasing challenge and threats against our mission to build inclusive societies. Because building trust for the democratic system is fundamental for sustainable development. Everyone should be able to raise their voice and become democratic elected officials. That includes women and men, regardless of your origin or your identity. To be capable to build inclusive, participatory societies, we must ensure safe environments for elected officials. It is a question of democracy. Inclusive societies where everyone can raise their voice is the ground for participatory democracies. Citizens' engagements needs to be institutionalized and systemized in local authorities and regions as part of the overall governance system. Mainstreaming citizens' dialogue and engagements requires, among other things, capable internal structures with agreed policies, clearly defined responsibilities, and changes in municipal culture. In both our Pact for the Future and in the Common Agenda, we highlight the necessities for inclusive democratic societies built on trust, trust for the system and trust for people. To build trust for the democratic system, we need to build inclusive societies where we improve people's experiences with public institutions and basic services. We need new spaces for dialogue, guaranteeing rigorous channels of information. Devising new tools for participatory democracy and transparency are lines of work that we must promote in order to begin to regain confidence in the functioning of our societies. To implement good governance, we need to have built trust through local participation. Co-responsibility and active citizenship should be at the center of democratic governance. Governments can make decisive contributions by enacting clear and consistent policies, ensuring impartial and detached administration, and ensuring the consistent application of the rule of law and the certainty of sanction. The rule of law is fundamental to international peace and security and political stability, to achieve economic and social progress and development, and to protect people's rights and fundamental freedoms. It needs to consider the new digital era. It also needs to be linked to a global code of conduct to prevent hate speech, to promote informed and sustained citizens' participation in public life and decision-making, promoting freedom of speech and conscience and artistic expression, and to ensure that women and girls are fully empowered to achieve their full potential as citizens and foster a feminist way of going about politics. Well, now to the question for the agenda that will be held in the Agora. At the local level, we have an advantage. We are close to the people affected by our decisions. This creates endless opportunities to create change. Even if we often have different solutions in this group and among other politicians because of the context, we can and we should learn from each other. From the local and regional level, we must work against these undemocratic acts, but also learn how to better prevent hate and threats against local and regional politicians to safeguard the democracy. But we also need changes from the global and the national level to make a safe environment for our local political representatives. We must raise these issues and highlight the problems. We must share experiences and proposals for solutions. Working together to prevent and strengthen the safety and security of elected representatives is a prerequisite for success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Special Envoy, for this important contribution. There are three things that I would like to highlight and maybe then pick up in the conversation that we need to deal with later. How much this hate speech and this harassment that local elected officials are experiencing all over the world is affecting the quality of democracy, because then there is a lot of people that will not run for office, and we have a great deficit in particular of women that after a first experience, they do not run again. So this issue of quality of democracy is extremely important. And it is linked with the change of perspective about how people perceive politicians and the job of a politician. They are not perceived like the servants that you are, the public servants that you are. And people do not realize when I talk to family, to friends, they do not realize that the biggest part of the political representation at local and territorial level are people that that are not paid to do that job. They do it on voluntary basis because they have this urge to serve. And even if you're paid for that, you are serving the public. But that has faded away, and so the notion of politician and someone that is only looking for their own interest is very common. So I think this will be very critical for us to address. How can we address that? And the other issue that you have put forward for the conversation, and I hope that we can see coming back, is the very thin relationship between the freedom of expression, which is extremely important, but also making the difference that you cannot actually say everything. And here, nowadays, people put something out there thinking that is communication, but communication doesn't happen until there is a recipient at the other end and treats that information. That is actual communication. For me, those two aspects are very, very important. The issue of rule of law is also something that we will need to deal with. I think within UCLG will link very much with the whole governance question that is coming up in the exercise tomorrow. But thank you very much for framing this, and I really look forward to working in, linked with your roadmap as a special envoy on how to create these spaces to foster this dialogue and to give our membership the tools to enhance the kind of dialogue that we need to gain trust back. Allow me now to go to a different region. Nos vamos ahora a Latinoamérica. Emilio Jatón, intendente, debo decir, de Santa Fe, en medio de este panorama de polarización, de falta de confianza, de crítica a las instituciones y a los políticos. Intendente, usted toma el Pacto para el Futuro y dice, en Santa Fe vamos a pensar en el futuro y vamos a tener nuestro pacto, y abre un proceso participativo para toda la ciudad, comenzando por una noche de ideas, pero abriendo debates sobre los ejes de personas, planeta y gobierno. ¿Cómo encaja esto, intendente, esa falta de confianza con poder hacer algo de estas dimensiones y tan visionario en una ciudad como Santa Fe? Nos va a encantar oír su caso. Adelante.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Emilia. Es un gusto estar en este conversatorio y sobre todo para hablar de confianza. ¿Cómo encaja esto? Digo, las construcciones, yo no quiero ser tan taxativo acerca de cómo impacta la falta de confianza en el mundo entero, porque creo que las construcciones de confianza tienen que nacer de los lugares propiamente dicho. Digo, la generación de confianza con la ciudadanía y las instituciones es el paso fundamental para avanzar y sobre todo para avanzar en un pacto para el futuro. El primer lazo de confianza que existe entre la gente y nosotros es el momento del voto. Allí empieza el lazo de confianza en cada elección. Y ese lazo de confianza es un juego de todos los días, ¿Y por qué llegamos nosotros a un pacto para el futuro? Porque fuimos a través del tiempo generando lazos de confianza, y ustedes lo pueden leer allí. Los lazos de confianza se hacen diariamente, porque la confianza además debe ser racional y tiene un componente afectivo muy importante. Y en los gobiernos de cercanía, ese comportamiento y ese componente afectivo es muy importante. Y lo que empezamos a hacer para generar confianza es el cara a cara, el día a día, el cómo damos respuestas. Y creamos asambleas barriales en las cuales los funcionarios y nosotros nos enfrentamos a la gente y damos respuestas y escuchamos. Y a partir de allí tomamos decisiones. Hay una frase que siempre te la digo, Emilia, y se lo digo en este foro, que por allí nosotros construimos las decisiones, no las tomamos. Y el lugar para construir las decisiones son esas asambleas barriales que nos van a llevar a un pacto para el futuro. Siempre que haya confianza va a existir cooperación. Y a partir de allí es el eje central. Y la confianza termina siendo en estas asambleas barriales y en este pacto para el futuro un factor sumamente silencioso que permite cooperar. Cada vez con más frecuencia la ciudadanía es convocada y llamada a participar en definiciones en asuntos públicos, decisiones que afectan a su vida cotidiana, y allí empiezan estos vínculos que estamos viendo en esta placa, vínculos con el compromiso para el pacto para el futuro. La confianza genera cooperación. Los ámbitos de participación son múltiples, son muchos, pero solo son fructíferos si sus resultados son realmente tangibles, tocables, para mostrar, y eso es lo que estamos haciendo. Y además, el otro elemento para el pacto para el futuro, que es lo que estamos construyendo, es la implicación netamente de todos los ciudadanos, de todos los sectores, sin olvidarnos de ninguno. Allí en el pacto para el futuro, que ya hicimos la primera reunión, ¿quiénes estuvieron sentados? Los científicos, los tecnológicos, los emprendedores, los académicos, los empresarios, y allí empiezan a generarse los distintos resultados. Trabajamos desde el primer día en Santa Fe para crear estos múltiples espacios. Quisiera puntualizar en dos dispositivos la participación que estamos haciendo. Una es esto, que son las asambleas ciudadanas, las redes sociales estatales, que son un lugar de encuentro entre el Estado y las organizaciones, las vecinales, los centros de salud, los curas párrocos, y todo lo que conlleva un barrio. Hoy están funcionando más de 20 en la ciudad de Santa Fe que trabajan sobre los problemas cotidianos de cada barrio, que imaginan soluciones, se comprometen con mejoras en su entorno. Cada red, cuando nos juntamos, expone la confianza que existe entre el Estado y las instituciones. Y por otro lado, hemos conformado un Urban Lab, el laboratorio de innovación y también transformación urbana. Este laboratorio es el nexo que articula entre lo científico, lo tecnológico, lo académico, lo empresarial y también todos los emprendedores. Ambos espacios suspenden lo que estamos planteando aquí, que en el medio de la no confianza existe una incertidumbre social, y estos espacios hacen más que reconciliar los intereses propios con los otros. Hace un mes, y esto vale la pena ponerlo en este debate, presentamos el Pacto para el Futuro en Santa Fe. Convocamos a representantes de todos los sectores, redes socioestatales, miembros del Urban Lab. Más de 130 personas compartieron el encuentro y definieron los temas que tienen que estar presentes en el Pacto para el Futuro. En ese encuentro, la ciudadanía tuvo la oportunidad de inspirarse con palabras. Estuvo Carlos Moreno allí, estuvo Jorge Jaramillo también, y a través de las palabras de ellos empezamos a pensar un futuro común, que se entienda bien, un futuro común. En 2 semanas vamos a llevar esos encuentros a los diferentes barrios. No solo va a quedar en el centro de la ciudad, no solo va a quedar con los pensadores, sino que ese pacto va a los barrios para avanzar en el gran acuerdo colectivo sobre la ciudad que queremos, más justa, más equitativa, más productiva, más sostenible. Como gobierno tenemos puesto nuestro empeño en coordinar la acción colectiva, porque, a ver, hay que ser muy claros, sin acción colectiva no se puede ir a ningún lado, no hay horizonte, y estamos proponiendo un debate ambicioso para la ciudad que está basado no en una mirada solo política, sino en las necesidades reales, actuales, que esas acciones sean transformadoras y nos permitan llevar a algún lugar. El Pacto para el Futuro es una herramienta, y la entendimos como tal, una herramienta de participación y construcción de confianza, y es un instrumento muy poderoso para encaminar nuestras ciudades hacia los compromisos que la pongan en sintonía con agendas mundiales. Creemos que ese es el camino, y es un camino diario que se expone y va y viene con los ciudadanos. También aquí cumple un rol importante el comportamiento de cada uno de nosotros. cómo nos comportemos, cómo nos mostremos en la sociedad. Digo, como gestos particulares. Aquí nadie cobra viáticos, yo ando en mi auto particular, me muevo por todos lados, yo hago asambleas ciudadanas en las plazas, porque cuando bajo del auto llega la gente y habla con nosotros. Aquí no hay audiencias. También eso forma parte de este entramado de cómo nos relacionamos con la gente. Creo que hay una gran oportunidad para generar confianza desde los gobiernos locales, sobre todo, ¿saben qué? Porque la cercanía nos favorece, para romper o para hacer. Nosotros apostamos para hacer, nosotros apostamos que esa generación de confianza sea cara a cara, día a día y con cada cosa que vayamos construyendo. Por eso pusimos en tela de juicio, pusimos en el centro el Pacto para el Futuro, pusimos en el centro un futuro, pero basados en las realidades. Me parece que ese es el camino y ese es el aporte que estamos haciendo desde la ciudad capital de Santa Fe, República Argentina, donde tenemos 500.000 habitantes, que parece mucho, pero es una ciudad intermedia en la cual se puede pensar, en la cual se puede proyectar, y para nosotros el Pacto para el Futuro es el eje central para seguir para adelante.
Muchísimas gracias, intendente. No sabe qué orgullo es para nosotros pensar que este pacto para el futuro está inspirando las discusiones también en los barrios de ciudades como Santa Fe. Santa Fe es la primera que está llevando la discusión a los barrios, pero estoy segura de que no será la última, y nos da pues mucha esperanza, ¿no? La clave humana que usted pone por delante, pero también el compromiso de las deliberaciones salgan también decisiones concretas y de juntar a todos los actores es extremadamente importante. Le agradezco mucho la presentación de este caso y como sabe, vamos a seguir acompañando este proceso con mucha ilusión y con mucha curiosidad de Santa Fe al mundo, como decimos siempre, intendente. Ahora vamos a otro actor muy importante para nosotros. Kathy Rubin is an artist and civic change practitioner that has won our prize, the International Observatory for Participatory Democracy Award, because of the work that she has been doing, in particular in Manchester, around theater and decision making. And so Kathy has accompanied us also in our retreat to bring her experience as one of those tools that we need to promote to enhance participation, a participation that will really include everyone and very often discriminated groups. Kathy, we thought it was very, very important to bring you to this discussion around trust, the perception of institutions, and the tools that we need to put together to make our democracies truly participatory. The floor is yours, dear Kathy. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Hear me okay? I have internet. Is it working okay?
The sound is not that great, but let us try. We can understand. Kathy, go ahead.
Maybe I will turn off my video.
Turn off your video and
make it any better.
Yes, I think that is working.
Okay, I apologize. I'm here in Mexico City with People Powers convening on participatory democracy, and the internet is not so stable, but I'm very happy to be here. Please let me know if it's breaking up. So yes, I'm excited to think with you all more about trust and in relation to the work that I'm doing in cities, particularly around the UK with legislative theater. And I want to pick up on a few points that we've heard already that I think I will continue to talk about in this few minutes. So Jessica talked about a lab of cities to practice and learn from trust, and particularly the idea that we need guided interventions to do that. And I love that point, because I think what I think about with legislative theater is a kind of guided intervention or design for building trust. And I'll give an example of that for a moment. And then we heard about the challenge of building relationships with politicians and elected officials and policymakers, and how we come to be closer to them or feel, in relationship to them towards building trust, which I'm also thinking a lot about. And then we heard so many amazing examples of tool that comes originally from Brazil, like a lot of participatory democracy tools in the 1990s, and now growing and being practiced in different contexts, particularly local governments around the world. And in legislative theater, just briefly, the process is that a community that's facing a problem, we can say a policy problem, a design problem, a planning problem in a city or an institution, a human rights problem, most often, whether that's in terms of accessing housing, accessing healthcare, as Amelia was talking about, accessing food, nutritious food, cultural equity, so many different issues, transport, etc. And they come together to play games, tell stories, and build together a sense of understanding of the problem, in which they can create a play that they can take to other neighbors, peers, and policymakers to be able to analyze and look at the problem together, to identify, to understand the context, the human experience of the problem. And then they actually invite those audience members, again, neighbors, advocates, policymakers, to test out policy interventions, new ideas on stage, a real live policy testing situation, in which we can learn together what might work, what might not work, what might need to be amended. Yeah, so building a shared understanding, leading towards trust along the way of developing the policy ideas. So we framed the problem, we've tested out some ideas, and then everyone in the audience becomes a policy maker and is able to draft policies right there in the room with policy makers, with official policy makers, and draft those policies, sort them, narrow them down together, amend, discuss, deliberate, and finally vote, as you see in this image here. And then finally, and very importantly, policymakers in attendance make commitments to action in a specific time frame about the next steps that they're going to take, and everyone involved is kept informed along the way. So I'm going to tell you a quick story, and actually if you go to the slide before, I'll show you an image of a legislative theater process leading up to COP26, so just about almost 2 years ago, in Glasgow, where COP26 was held. And this was an intention from the Glasgow City Council to involve young people, and particularly disabled young people, in informing and helping to develop a new transport strategy and a new city development plan that would lead towards or support the goals of a green Glasgow. And these young people who came together already felt a lack of trust and belief that the council understood them. They'd had lots of experiences of being asked to consult and then feeling like those consultations didn't go anywhere. Yeah. And so they started to come together and talk about the challenges of accessibility in public transport, the challenges of accessibility and maintenance of public parks and green spaces, the challenges of using bicycles or active transport, and the costs of some of those transports, right? Lots of different things, discrimination towards disabled people in public transport, lots of different issues. And at some point in the process, we came together before the big legislative theater event, we came together with some staff from the city council. And maybe I'll just try to turn my video on, see if it works, to say hello. We came together with some staff from the city council to get more information and test out the scenes. And after the play, someone from the audience, from the council, came up to practice a new idea, an intervention, a strategy. And they actually started yelling at the young people and saying, you don't show up at our consultations, right? You don't come, you didn't come last time. And the environment was very tense. And the young people felt very put on the spot. And the whole council audience was very tense. And the young people were saying, well, actually, no one told us about these consultations. We didn't find out about them. They're at 11 a.m. when we're in school, right? They're closed by the time we get there. They're in a space that's not accessible to get to. And afterwards, the young people felt even more distanced from the staff and the city council. And they said, I don't know if we should continue with this project, because we were going to invite more people, because we just constantly get told that we're wrong and that we don't have the expertise, right? Coming back to these points here about people have the expertise to inform policy because of their lived experience. And they said, okay, no, actually, we really want to change what's going on in Glasgow. We want to green Glasgow, and we want it to be accessible and affordable for us and our peers. So we're going to revise our story, our framing of the problem, to integrate this piece about the consultations being inaccessible, and even about this sort of challenging dynamic that we're experiencing between council staff and young people. And then we had a performance, a legislative theater event, and there were elected members there, council leads. And you know what? Everyone was able to laugh at those scenes about somebody in the council having a consultation and saying, oh, I don't know anything about bees and the consultation's over and I have to leave, right? And sort of distancing themselves from the young people. And there was a really deep understanding of the experience of the young people in those consultations, which allowed us to then, right, as we heard in Argentina just now, which allowed us to craft and shape better ways of involving young people in developing policy, and better ways of keeping them informed about what was going to happen with the rollout of the buses being more accessible, and whatever the priorities were from this process. So there was a journey of a challenge of trust and leading to even a further breakdown of trust. But there were some key tools, and I'll just finish on this. There were some key tools that this process allowed as a design, right? Maybe in this lab as a design, that allowed the young people to continue working towards trust. And the council, right? Coming from both sides, said, we need to stick together in this. And what were those key tools? Yeah. And we talked about this in the retreat, the UCLG retreat in February. So first, we were able to build a deeper shared understanding of the problem, not only the experience of young people accessing transport and public spaces, 15-minute neighborhoods, but also the experience of young people trying to engage with the council in having their voices heard. This deeper understanding, through a bit of humor, a bit of laughter, a bit of joy, allowed for us to then have a shared experience of problem solving, right? Then we worked together, elected members, policymakers, and residents together to say, how could we reshape? Let's test some new ideas. And we came to real concrete outcomes, and some of them have been implemented in Glasgow since 2021. And finally, in this process in particular, there was a real moment of risk and vulnerability. The residents are going to put themselves at the risk of experiencing a further challenge of a breakdown of trust and really saying what they need. And the elected members and the policymakers took a risk to continue to engage even when they didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And they were facing a little bit of critique. But in order to get through that, we were able to come to both a shared sense of risk that led to a really deep commitment by the young people in continuing to participate with the city council, showing up at COP26. So these young people spoke at COP26 afterwards, got much more engaged in COP26 activities than they ever had been before. And that was, as well as the concrete outputs, was a really powerful outcome. So just to wrap up, I think that there's a few key points here. One is that, yes, everyone is a policymaker because everyone has expertise in the way that those policies impact their lives. And that directly relates to the points in the common agenda about our own ability to impact our experience with basic services, right? Based on our experience. Yeah. And that everyone through this shared understanding of challenges or potentially human rights challenges, our shared problem solving and our shared risk taking in the service of solving the problem, we can build a deeper, ongoing and embedded relationship and trust in those public institutions. So my questions for the Agora are, what are some other tools that you all are using or that we might use, some other designs, right, or guided interventions, as Jessica said, that can help reshape or overturn some entrenched power dynamics that might be leading to a lack of trust between governments or municipalities, and that are keeping governments and municipalities in a way separate from solving and understanding problems together. And this is particular to my interest, that joy and creativity can be ingredients that help rebuild trust. They're not the only things we need, but they're ingredients that help set the scene. So I'll leave it there, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It's always an inspiration to hear from your experiences, and I really like how your experience connects very much with that human perspective that the mayor of Santa Fe was bringing. I was having this wild idea, who knows, in one of the rounds of the construction of the Pacts for the Future in Santa Fe, there is legislative theater that needs to be applied. Who knows? We might convince him to do that and put that to test again. Thank you very much. Thank you also for bringing this very important factor to play, which is who has the expertise, which is the same question as what is knowledge and who has knowledge. And this is emerging in our conversations around the commons. What are the commons and who has knowledge around them and who can protect them? These are very, very relevant discussions where I think local and regional governments can play a very strong role to shift the perceptions and to raise awareness about the collective power that we all have, right? And I think the next generation of participatory instruments that we need to promote will need to have a very strong component around this. Beyond taking part in decision making, I think that the process and how we value experience and knowledge will be very critical for that discussion. I'm very happy to have with us Professor Carlos Moreno, and Carlos everybody knows Carlos because he's the 15-minute professor, 15-minute cities around the world. Carlos has been promoting the proximity notion in our cities and territories, but he is in this session because that notion of proximity and of the 15-minute cities has been targeted by social media and by fake news as a diabolic instrument to limit the rights of people. And so we've been talking about this environment of fake news, etc., with Jessica at the beginning. Carlos, we want you to share your opinion and how you feel we can rebuild trust from your own case to the rest of the work that we need to do. And then I will invite Jessica maybe for some thoughts after these presentations, linking it up with your own presentation, Jessica. So just be aware of that. Carlos, bienvenido. Qué gusto tenerte con nosotros y te invitamos como conspirador máximo para la proximidad. No te oímos.
Muchísimas gracias, querida Emilia. Un abrazo aquí desde un aeropuerto antes de continuar a otra parte. Y un saludo muy especial a todas las amigas y amigos que veo conectados. Vi Emilio Jatón, que lo cogí ya cuando estaba terminando. Gran amigo de Santa Fe, Billy, Comet, en fin, todos los amigos. Como tenemos poco tiempo, voy directamente a la pregunta que me has hecho. Si me pueden permitir de compartir la pantalla, les he preparado en 6 minutos una pequeña historia sobre cómo la confianza es fundamental hoy en día para poder sobrepasar momentos tan críticos como el que he vivido. Por favor, ¿puedo compartir la pantalla?
El
It is possible
problema-
to share.
Claro, no podemos compartir pantalla en esta sesión porque está producida, pero si nos mandas la presentación, la ponemos nosotros.
Ah, ok. No había entendido esto. Bueno, entonces os voy a contarla y la mandaré.
Pero mándanosla, si nos la mandas ahora, la ponemos.
Ok, ¿a quién la mando?
E.6.
Un segundo, si me das un segundo. Emilia. ¿Te la mando por WhatsApp? ¿Es posible?
Por donde quieras.
Ok, vale. Aquí ya está en un segundo la tienes.
Listo. Pero comienza a compartir.
Sí. Perdón, me equivoqué. Te envié la conferencia a la que acabo de salir. que es distinta.
¿Quieres que te demos un minuto y haces y cuando esté todo?
Sí, es mejor. Ok, vale.
¿Te sientes más cómodo? Pues hacemos así, because this is an interactive process and we can do that. So, colleagues, let us go. I wanted to go to Jessica and for some feedback. How do you see your own perception and your own experience as a journalist connecting with the cases that the contributions of the elected officials and practitioners that we have had? Jessica, some thoughts.
I think it's been really interesting to listen to just the diversity of perspectives from the level of governance. So from a mayor to the specific case of what challenges political actors, and then how to engage the public in political action. And I think that that's something where we're seeing, as you said, Amelia, these questions about who's entitled to act and who is entitled to input. And I think that goes to the root of where some of the trust issues are coming from, where people feel disenfranchised. They don't feel entitled to participate. They don't feel invited to a conversation. And in governance, that's something where it's going to then undermine the belief in that system. And I think the interesting thing for me as a journalist working on urban issues is having seen over the years this pressure toward participation and toward open systems that choose the design for a park, or new ideas about how to govern public spaces in general, or new impetus toward transit policy, things like this. So how participation has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years is fascinating. And as I've seen people become disenfranchised, and as things have become more problematic in many places, it's interesting to also see participation rise at the same time. So I don't think it's that characterization of one perspective is more optimistic or more pessimistic, and that kind of democratic process and active participation are the only way forward. I think if you read as a journalist across different contexts and across different ways of engaging, you'll see that we actually need a more open approach, and an approach that embraces difference and conflict and perspectives that have nothing to do with ours, and processes that are maybe more centrally led and less democratic. And the questions will be, how do we engage actors that we fundamentally don't understand? And it's my role as a member of the media to try to explain where things work and where they don't in cities, regardless of the genesis of what they are. To mention that genesis, but to also embrace contexts that are maybe more problematic or less problematic to different actors. So how do we engage with understanding in order to build up trust in community and local governance, and then to touch at national level, but to get outside of a box where we think only one approach is correct?
Thank you so much, Jessica. We will certainly take this into account. I mean, involving also those that we have very little to do with, we don't understand, and we find them very far away from anything that we know. But this is linked with your initial thoughts also as well on going from people like me notion, which has reduced the sense of community. In fact, it has really sectoralized many of the discussions. I think that is also a very good departing point for some of the discussions that we need to have. Also, in the way that you see the role of media, which is not necessarily the way that other institutions look at media. But of course, if it were not for free press, we would not be able to understand the world as it is and its evolution, which that evolution is always much faster than that of formal institutions. That is also something that we need to take into account. I see that Emilio Jatón would like to intervene. Intendente, ¿quiere intervenir ahora o prefiere intervenir después de Carlos?
No, es solo un aporte, Emilia, si se puede.
Adelante.
Mira, escuchaba recién a la colega periodista y en verdad tengo que poner mi aporte allí porque he sido periodista por más de 20 años. Y si hay algo que hice durante toda mi vida de periodista es analizar el comportamiento de la política y esa relación directa en la creación de confianza. Mira, lo que siempre hemos visto desde el periodismo es que el eje central es cómo se toman las decisiones y con quién se toman las decisiones. Me parece que allí está la clave de todo esto y en verdad, cuando yo llego del periodismo a la función pública, si hay algo que tuve presente, es toda la enseñanza que me dejó como líder en la comunicación en la región para no cometer esos errores. Y lo que hicimos primero es que las tomas de decisiones no nazcan solo de la política y desde un sector. A partir de allí me parece que empieza la construcción desde cualquier lugar en el mundo. Desde cualquier lugar en el mundo. Por eso nosotros decimos que construimos las decisiones y no las tomamos, porque es un error creer que la política o los líderes pueden cambiar la vida de los otros si no comparten esa decisión con los otros. Por eso mi mirada es en una conjunción desde el periodismo y también de la función pública. Hoy conviven las dos personas en mí. Aquel que fue periodista durante 20 años y aquel que hoy toma decisiones y no se quiere equivocar como lo que se habían equivocado durante todo este tiempo y yo pude analizar. Solo era mi aporte, Emilia.
No, muchísimas gracias, Intendente, también por recordarnos ese papel, porque a veces vemos a los políticos solo como políticos, pero los políticos son muchas otras cosas, como cada uno de nosotros también. Muchas gracias por este aporte y ahora sí vamos a Carlos. Carlos, tenemos todo listo, también la presentación. Aquí la ves, adelante, amigo.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias. Sí, como es un tiempo corto, 6 minutos, hice una pequeña historia de lo que me ha pasado. Como ha dicho Emilia, como un trabajo de investigación nos lleva en unas pocas semanas a convertirse en el enemigo público número 1. Entonces, esto nos interpela sobre la cuestión de la confianza, cómo este concepto que es hecho para tener ciudades más felices, más prósperas, una proximidad policéntrica, se vuelve una paranoia de conspiranoicos diciendo que queremos restringir los desplazamientos, vigilar la gente, no dejarla salir en nuevos guetos. Y se vuelve, la slide siguiente, una gran manipulación bajo este nombre del Gran Receta, del Great Reset, que manejan todos los complotistas internacionales. ¿Sigues? Puedes pasarlas unas y otras, no hay problema, yo sigo. Puedes pasar la siguiente.
El equipo está en ello, sí, ya está.
Sí, puedes pasarla sin que yo pare de hablar. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Que finalmente, en este mundo de tanta complejidad, cuando hay tanta incertidumbre, estamos demostrando la ecuación de Averroes. La ignorancia genera el miedo genera el odio genera la violencia. Esto lo dijo Averroes en el siglo XII y lo estamos viviendo exactamente tal cual. La ignorancia sobre lo que es este concepto genera el miedo. El miedo aparece con esas teorías. Queremos hacer un nuevo climate lockdown. Queremos meter a la gente encasillada. Y este miedo está generando el odio. Mira lo que pasa, que los que dicen que no quieren hacer los 15 minutos, dicen es que no queremos que haya bajo carbón porque esto acaba la vida. La siguiente igualmente está incitando a transformar esta cuestión de miedo en un odio al cual está llegando gente que manifiesta en la calle diciendo no es solamente los 15 minutos, es que no creemos que haya emergencia climática, es que no creemos que igualmente exista vacunaciones para el COVID. No queremos que hayan cartas de identidad digitales. Queremos un nuevo orden mundial. Y son los mismos que dicen, queremos que todo el mundo tenga un auto porque es un derecho para cada cual. Y finalmente se está produciendo no solamente la generación del miedo, sino se está generando el odio a aquellos que plantean un comportamiento que nos lleve colectivamente a salvaguardar la humanidad en sus derechos fundamentales de la humanidad, que es lo que estamos promoviendo con el Pacto para el Futuro de la Humanidad. No es el pacto para el futuro del derecho de cada cual a andar en su auto privatizando el espacio público. Pero esto no es una cuestión de discusión, es simplemente de tomar una consigna y transformarla en odio. Si pasas a la siguiente, ¿qué estamos obteniendo? Estamos obteniendo manifestaciones de gente, tal vez ciudadanos comunes y corrientes, pero que con este discurso de los neofascistas que aparecieron, de todos los sectores más ultraderechistas, quieren, por lo tanto, transformar este miedo, esta ignorancia, este miedo y este odio en violencia. Y a partir de allí encuentran no solamente que es los 15 minutos, sino igualmente que soy yo, el responsable, perteneciente a un nuevo orden mundial. En la noche me convierto en el gator, soy el enemigo público número 1, me amenazan de muerte, la siguiente está en inglés, y se vuelve esto en un rollo mundial en el cual todas las fuerzas más oscuras vienen a generar un efecto de manada, yo diría, en el cual los llamados a la violencia se vuelven amenazas de muerte permanentemente. Pasa la siguiente. ¿Qué podemos tirar de positivo con respecto a la cuestión de la confianza? Que se generó un movimiento de los periodistas. Los periodistas del mundo entero han hecho un trabajo excepcional, que ha sido, de manera objetiva, de diferenciar lo que es verdad, lo que es una cuestión interrogante, lo que es mentira y odio. Y ese trabajo fue espectacular y creo que fue lo que salvó mi carrera profesional, porque imagínense que gente masivamente crea a estos bulos. Finalmente dirán, este señor nunca ha sido científico, lo que nos quiere es encerrar en nuestras casas y se vuelve muy difícil. Lo que me salvó igualmente es el comportamiento del mundo científico. Los científicos en el mundo entero se movilizaron. Hubo una petición en línea por un colega, sin yo saberlo, y en 3 días reunió más de 5.000 firmas de gente que decía el derecho a la investigación es inalienable igualmente. Y mis compañeros científicos del mundo entero, que tengamos acuerdos o desacuerdos sobre la conceptualización, manifestaron muy claramente la importancia de la investigación. Y los alcaldes, además, y pasas a la última, que manifestaron igualmente su apoyo total para poder hacer. ¿Qué pasó al final? Que hubo elecciones, no solamente en Oxford, sino en todo UK este fin de semana. Y finalmente, el voto ha sido muy categórico. Todos los complotistas, todos los que me amenazaron, todos aquellos que han querido sembrar miedo, han perdido totalmente las elecciones. Los complotistas prácticamente obtuvieron menos de 5% y los sectores más conservadores han perdido escaños por haberse alineado con ese movimiento complotista. Finalmente, quiere decir que cuando se logra hacer un trabajo de investigación por los periodistas, de movilización explicativa de los científicos, los ciudadanos no se dejan comer cuento como se diría y están dispuestos a movilizarse, como fue en estas elecciones, para no entregarle a los complotistas nuestra conciencia. Yo pienso que es algo muy interesante lo que ha pasado porque refleja la importancia en el pacto para el futuro de la humanidad de esto que estamos hablando, People, Planet, Government. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Carlos. You are leaving me with a lot of hope in the way that you are sharing this story, and I see Jessica nodding and agreeing with the role that you have also given to the journalists, because I think this is very important. You know, when I realized we had a real issue and that the issue was really reaching the streets is when I went to the shop in my neighborhood, a small shop where they sell the Spanish ham, you know, this delicatessen, and there was a lady talking there and saying that these murderers of the city of the 15 minutes were going to prohibit her to buy ham because they only wanted people to eat vegetables, and she wouldn't be able to move outside of our neighborhood and wouldn't be able to visit her daughter. And there I came to realize how broad the problem had become. And I want to hope that the reactions in my country, with also elections here in Spain coming up at the end of the month on the 28th, will be the same as in the UK. I'm not that sure about it, but I think the way that Carlos has portrayed the case is extremely useful for us also to put in place some mechanisms to counter-rest the narratives. Carlos, I know you need to go and catch your plane. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you in an extra time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao.
But I think that can really help us put in perspective the different layers that we need to tackle, right, in order to address the miscommunication, the different sectors, and the kind of dialogue that we need to shape together. So thank you very much for that. And I will now go to the next segment of our session. Is what we call In Focus, and this is where one of our key partners on this area of work presents what is coming next from their perspectives. And in this occasion, of course, we have with us the Open Government Partnership represented by Jose Maria Marin, who I understand will discuss and present to us the objectives of the summit of the Open Government Partnership in 2023. Welcome, Jose María. Un gusto tenerte con nosotros.
Gracias, Emilia. Muchas gracias a todos. I will continue in English if that's okay. It's always a real pleasure to be part of these discussions, and very inspiring as to the work that we're doing, and a pleasure to continue to collaborate with UCLG and with all the members and partners of this great community. So for those who don't know the Open Government Partnership, we're an international platform that was founded in 2011 that brings together reformers outside and inside government to transform the way that government serves its citizens. As of today, we have more than 100 local government jurisdictions and more than 75 national governments that are part of our members. And to add to this, we have thousands of civil society organizations and partners that are also part of our community. Just like I think everybody here in this call, we're convinced that in the face of the trust crisis that we have, the principles of open government, which are transparency, citizen participation, and accountability, can provide a solution to improve the communications and understanding between government and citizens, and consequently improve the design and the implementation of all these public policies and processes. Now, it's been music to my ears to listen to the previous interventions relating to all the different practices that there are. And also we share, of course, the preoccupations around trust and the methods in which we can change them. But one of the questions that we were faced with is, how do we, through open government and these issues about discussion, transparency, participation keep coming up in our conversations, but how do we take that to scale? How do we change the way in which government is done at scale at both national and local levels? And this is where the partnership comes in, because we provide a space where we can look at institutionalizing these processes. How do we make sure that all the great work that is happening in Santa Fe is not only happening in Santa Fe, but there is something that can be learned and shared with other partners? How to make sure that these processes are done well, because as was noted also in the concept note for this discussion, there's some risks about doing an opening government the right way and the wrong way. And what does that mean in the journey of rebuilding trust? Also that and Jessica was mentioning, and to the degree that we can challenge that trust to make it stronger and better. And that is where the partnership, the Open Government Partnership, provides a solution. And this solution is threefold. One is to provide a space that is within the local jurisdictions, but also that space that is shared internationally, to be able to continuously discuss and co-create those methods, those approaches to open government with citizens, with civil society organizations, with businesses that can actually contribute to rebuilding that trust. I think it's not a point to be taken lightly, the fact that, these are difficult processes. There were building blocks here that required consistency, that required dialogue. Opening government in itself is an opportunity to rebuild that trust. And that's the second point that I think is important for the Open Government Partnership and how we approach membership and co-creation of action plans. As was mentioned again also with, by Intendente Jaton, their process of constructing and discussing with the citizens of Santa Fe, the Pact for the Future is something, it's an exercise in building trust, because we also believe that trust is something that is gained through experience, not only through knowing what somebody else was doing or good intentions. And I think also that, very much comes through in acts like, and approaches like legislative theory, where the presence in going through that building and trust and breaking that trust and rebuilding it again is what ultimately allows all parties to reach a common understanding at the end. So including that process in co-creating a concrete action plan is important for us. And lastly is action. Open Government Partnership is all about action and implementing those reforms and new innovations all along. Now, last year, the OGP co-created its new strategy for the next 5 years. And here we see a lot of different concerns and let's say areas of focus that we share with this conversation. We want to focus in the next couple of years on issues of civic space that was just mentioned by Carola Gunnarsson. We want to make sure that participation is extremely important, and we want to make sure that issues of digitalization and anti-corruption are also being tackled as part of this trust conversation. And this strategy is going to have its first moment in the summit. This means that this year's Global Summit is going to be hosted by Tallinn, in Tallinn by our co-chair Estonia, which is also a member country of ours and the co-chair of the steering committee. Now, the agenda for this summit is very much focused on bringing together the community of government and civil society, at local, at national level, to be able to identify how can we move forward as a community and at scale, tackle these problems, tackle these issues jointly, focusing on these, the issues that were just being mentioned as part of the conversation, but working together as a community that believes in these open government values, but are also convinced that we need to go through the process of reconstructing the way in which we relate to each other through open government. So the summit is going to be in September, and I'm going to be dropping some links so you can see a little bit more of the agenda. It's very timely for us to have this, this intervention, because the registration is now open and the main agenda is up for consultation now, where we can all in this community, build together the way in which we want to discuss these issues and take the issue of trust further. So with that, I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much for the partnership that we have, for the work that you do at local level. But I think something that is very important is to ensure this dialogue between the local and the national level. And I hope the summit will devote time to that and allow for the innovative approaches of local governments also to permeate in the open government perceptions of national governments, because as we will be discussing tomorrow in the future envisioning exercise around governance architecture, it will be very important to transform those relationships if we want to address some of the challenges that we are discussing today, which are they are new challenges because of new tools and new realities that now are available for everyone. So thank you very much. So those of you that have been with us throughout these exercises know that we are trying to reflect everything that you are saying also in an interactive tool, a mural, and we want to show you where we are with that mural before we go to the Agora. The mural has the shape of a Ludo. We have all played a Ludo when we were kids, and the Ludo goes to one single space, which is the Pact for the Future. That is the implementing Pact for the Future. We have been dealing with different different squares in our cities. The green one is reflecting our discussions on the commons. But we have also been discussing finance, that is in the very appropriate red color. And today we will be dealing with trust. And we are working on it in yellow. And all these post-its and comments are already things that you have been saying today. At the end of the Agora, we will run through some of the key takeaways, but most importantly, you are able to also contribute to the mural as well. And don't be afraid of messing it up, because our team that knows very well how to keep it together in a nice way will work on it later. But so that you know, this is an open tool, a live tool that we will be using. So now I am very pleased to go to one of our favorite segments in these sessions is the Agora discussion. You know, we work with cities, so we like public space, we like squares, and we like dialogue. And I am very, very happy that we have with us Barbara Holtman from Fixed Africa. Barbara has been involved in our town hall processes, in many of our discussions, shaping the Pact for the Future. I am sure, Barbara, that you see how our narrative and our work together is evolving. We are now in your hands to facilitate this segment, but please, first, some comments from your side on your perceptions of this discussion. Welcome, Barbara. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Emilia, and thank you very much for inviting me. What a fascinating discussion. I think that one of the things that we coming from Southern Africa, one of the things that I must say is that it's not necessarily a matter of rebuilding trust. I think that in many instances, our local governments have not ever experienced real trust with the communities. And so in a way, the whole discussion is very optimistic, because if we've been there before, if we feel that there is a historical place where there was trust between government and communities, then that at least is a good start. I really liked what Jessica had to say, and I really liked the consciousness of many of the presentations that were made today, the way that none of this is going to happen unless we consciously go there and try to build this trust. An issue of violence against leaders really fascinated me. In South Africa, we have a saying that says that when people burn resources and burn tires and burn in the streets, it is the smoke that calls. It is an indication that the levels of trust are so low that people feel that unless they are violent, unless they create real violence, they will not be heard at all. And that, of course, is a terrible state to be in. And I think, I was in Paris last month, and I was really shocked at the levels of violence and engagement there, and the levels of the sort of complete lack of respect, not only for the rule of law, but also for the environment. And so that I think that calls into question whose rule of law. Whose law are we talking about in many instances, and how do we feel about not only the laws themselves, but also about the consistency or lack of it with which laws are actually enforced, or with the compliance of law, that there seem to be different laws for different people in many circumstances. And that's something that I think also comes down to what we mean by consultation when we develop laws and when we look at ways to implement laws at local level. Very often consultation, as we know, is something that people do because they have to, or that they feel people expect. But where does it lead? And I love the notion of joyful policy making. I love the idea of actually putting it into a methodology that makes it something that people will enjoy doing, rather than that people are intimidated by the lawmaking process, which I think is something that we very often see. And then it comes, and very specifically in the issue of public spaces, I think it comes to the issue of aesthetics. Who actually chooses what things look like? And perhaps that is harder in older cities than it is in cities like ours that don't have particularly beautiful history. But if we think about it, how far do we allow people to actually go in participating in designing change and in designing innovation? What is it that we protect, and how do we protect it in the end? We've just been involved in a process in an intermediary city in South Africa where there was a consultation process in designing a space that would be essentially used by informal traders and very much by local women and young people, and yet the aesthetics was designed by a consultant who was extremely highly educated in the matter of aesthetics, but not necessarily highly educated in the aesthetics of public ownership of space. And I think we talk about risks in terms of consultation, and maybe one of the risks we need to look at is that if we truly consult, if we truly open it up and we ask people, what does the city need to look like for you to feel that you are an active participation in the governance of the city, then we're going to have to give up on some of our aesthetic concerns. We have to give up on some of the things that we regard as good practice and that perhaps have sat there forever without ever being changed, and are protected by their own set of laws and by a notion of heritage. How do we build new heritage through a new set of laws that perhaps are not to the taste of those who are the most educated in the matter of making those kinds of decisions? So I think, and then the other thing that strikes me is that in a circumstance where there is low trust between particularly local government and the people who live in and use a city, then the risk of innovation is actually very low. There's not a huge amount to lose. And so perhaps it is that we can look at low trust as an opportunity, that people have very low expectations very often, both of communities and of local government. And if local government takes the lead in having a higher expectation of the contributions of community members, and particularly, I think, of young people, then we create a circumstance in which perhaps it's safer for all of us to fail. And I think the mayor of Santa Fe, when he talked about making mistakes, about not wanting to make mistakes, why shouldn't we make mistakes? How do we innovate without making mistakes? And surely if we have shared accountability, then we also share accountability for failing, but also then for learning and adapting and making things more inclusive and in building trust. So I think in a way where things don't work, innovation is the sensible option, not the risky option. And if we innovate in building relationships and we also ask people about how they would like to see those relationships play out, then we have something that we can really build on that can really make a difference. So yes, I really enjoyed the conversation so far, and I really look forward to the inputs now that we're going to have. Looking at 3 questions as a guide, but not necessarily as being constrained in terms of the discussion that will go from here. So what are the actions that we can, as local government, in alliance with civil society, take to promote trust through education, culture, more open and transparent institutions, and community life based on human rights? The second question being, what support and transformation should we demand from the international system in areas such as the regulation of major media, social media platforms, AI development companies? And I dread to think about anyone trying to answer that question about AI development, because it seems to be a very hotly disputed discussion at the moment. And then how do we address the debate on rebuilding trust in societies that are increasingly polarized, divided, and with the rise of extremism? And I think going along with that, with the needs of so many people to leave what they call home and seek new homes elsewhere because of the circumstances in which they live. And I think migration is something that is such a huge issue for all communities. And we really have a massive responsibility at this time to ensure that we don't make things worse, that we don't just perpetuate a cycle of chasing people away from the places in which they either have lived or wish to live. I've raised all 3 questions because I think they're so interrelated, as the subjects that we discuss very often are. But I'm going to leave it up to our guests who will lead the discussion to actually decide the way in which they will lead that discussion. So I'm going to start with Ilana Wang. And I think particularly since she is involved with migration and youth, perhaps this is a very good place to start. So thanks very much, Ilana.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Yeah, actually, as I was listening to the discussion and reflecting on a few different things, something really stood out to me that Katie earlier said, where she shared that anecdote about how some of the town hall organizers or whatever they were called, got angry at youth for not showing up. And it was because they did not know that there was a previous consultation to attend and it was during their school hours. And I think the first thing that I want to say in terms of trust building when it comes to building trust within youth and within migrant youth. And so when I say migrant youth, I want to generalize a little bit and say many different youth from different marginalized backgrounds as well. Because in terms of the challenges faced when it comes to building trust and building more resilience, more community building and community trust between governments, local governments, and migrant communities and youth, is that the challenges are often faced in that there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of lack of understanding of community needs, not just in terms of when they're available, but also how do we reach them? How do we create space in which they do not fear repercussions, for example, becoming known to local authorities or other groups that may put them in danger, which we've seen now that the polarization has meant that there's protests, there's violence, and oftentimes people in marginalized communities don't want to be known because of this fear. So I think the first thing that I want to say is building and co-creating with these communities, with youth, with migrant youth is so important when it comes to building trust, because not only will you be able to show them that you're listening to their needs, listening to their perspectives, and listening and really prioritizing their access, their contributions, but you're also showing that you're open to collaboration with the community in a way that I think a lot of national governments don't. And I think local governments are particularly well positioned to do this because we already see how so much local governments and local communities are built through the grassroots, are already engaging with their constituencies in ways that are innovative. And you see youth councillors doing that, you see mayors doing that, and it really is wonderful and has so much potential. But the second thing that I actually want to say is that this is often targeted and particularly vulnerable to things like fake news, fake media, and other ways in which trust gets broken down, such as being exposed to violence online or in person, as well as also being exposed to things like angry organizers who do not understand the needs of groups. So I think in terms of trying to engage with the communities and with community building, things like the use of Facebook, the use of online media needs to be handled very well by local governments, because that is a very crucial way to reach to reach young people, to reach young migrants, and reach groups that do not necessarily feel comfortable showing up straight away. But that's also where a lot of misinformation is spread. That's also where things like deepfakes and AI, we've been seeing more and more fake news come out. And oftentimes, what happens if a local politician gets deepfaked to say something that's very, very xenophobic? That can easily break down trust straight away. And so I think being very clear on local governments' communications, collaboration and communication is really, really key. But something that was mentioned earlier as well is how the opportunity to create trust is there when there is already low trust. And I would say that's very, very true. But we have to keep in mind that a low level of trust means that the trust can easily be broken again. So how do we sustainably create this trust? How do we sustainably co-create and build up this trust? I say that a lot, sorry, but how do we sustainably create this pipeline of collaboration and community communications, trust building, so that it is not easily broken again? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ilana. And of course, Ilana is also from the UCLG Youth Caucus, so it's doubly important to hear that voice. And I think one of the things that you're saying there, which is so important, is that if we don't do it right, if we don't do the outreach right, we miss so many really, really important voices. And so that's a really essential part of building trust. Next, I'd like to ask Rocchio Lombera, if you would please join us and tell us what your perspectives are on this. Thank you.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buen día a todas y todos desde Iztapalapa. Pues bueno, respecto a todo el tema de confianza, reflexionando con los apuntes que hemos tenido a la mano y lo que hemos escuchado acá. Respecto al tema específico que plantean ahorita de los medios y sobre todo de la inteligencia artificial, la tecnología y tal, pues nosotros sí hemos comprobado que para generar confianza se necesita un conocimiento mutuo, ¿no? En principio, o sea, cómo conocer a las personas más directamente y cómo conozcan a los gobernantes. Y entonces hay que tener cierta cercanía y diálogo. Se han mencionado estos conceptos. Tener una cierta convivencia. En este sentido, hay que ver se hablaba también en el documento, por ejemplo, de los entornos accesibles a esto. Y yo diría los entornos, los medios y los métodos. Y para eso es muy importante también conocer conocer muy bien a nuestra sociedad y a nuestros gobiernos. En este sentido, ¿qué medios nos van a permitir hacer esto y lograr una cercanía y un diálogo? En la Ciudad de México pareciera mentira, pero a pesar de que es una ciudad de masas, bueno, Iztapalapa tiene cerca de 2 millones de habitantes, la ciudad 8. Nuestra alcaldesa y también la jefa de gobierno de la ciudad han optado por, además de utilizar medios de información masivos, como pueden ser estos que se mencionan de los chats o Facebook o TikTok o todo esto, pues establecer medios diferenciados. Por ejemplo, la jefa de gobierno hace una conferencia matutina todos los días. Y eso establece, o sea, que la vean, que la sientan, que la perciba la población a través de una conferencia con medios de comunicación. Pero se establece un diálogo mediado por los medios. Ellos preguntan, pero igual que nuestro presidente, que por cierto han sido muy atacados con estas fake news y discursos de odio, ¿verdad? Como han enfrentado mucho es estas conferencias en donde median los medios de comunicación, pero la conversación va con la gente, con el pueblo, con los pueblos, ¿no? Que cada uno gobierna. Entonces, esto ayuda bastante en este tipo de ciudades, pero en una ciudad como Iztapalapa, donde hay que manejar pues, los diferentes sectores y lograr esa cercanía, los recorridos de barrios, el visitar la casa por casa, que también ha sido un medio que retoman la jefa de gobierno a nivel de la ciudad, es muy importante. O sea, que la gente toque casi físicamente a los gobernantes a través de diferentes costos. No es una innovación, bueno, puede ser una innovación ahora porque se ha perdido este cara a cara, esta cercanía, esta comunicación directa a través de medios de esta naturaleza. También un diálogo más real con audiencias, a través de audiencias directas, a través de asambleas informativas y asambleas donde se dialoga con la población. Pareciera mentira que es volver a medios anticuados, pero es cuando se logra esta comunicación directa, más cara a cara, más de tú a tú, como a la par de la misma población. Y estamos hablando, digo, no de poblados pequeños, estamos hablando de ciudades grandes, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo combinamos ahora sí que la tecnología con también volver a establecer esa cercanía, donde se establece una convivencia, se establecen compromisos mutuos, simplemente en un recorrido, en una audiencia, se van generando compromisos que, como bien decían también, si no hay resultados positivos respecto a esos compromisos, si no hay cumplimiento de esos compromisos, se pierde la confianza. Entonces, hay una serie de elementos que tomar en cuenta, ¿verdad? Para poder avanzar, sobre todo con poblaciones como en nuestro caso, que no es, o sea, la tecnología no está tan a la mano, se está buscando tener puntos de acceso digital gratuitos, pero si la gente no tiene el recurso para conectar sus datos, o sea, no puede pagar el tener acceso al Wi-Fi, ¿verdad? Entonces se queda así desconectada de toda esa comunicación tecnológica. Y entonces acá sí tenemos que utilizar las dos partes, ¿no? El cara a cara, que además ayuda mucho porque hay un conocimiento directo de las personas que aumenta muchísimo la confianza. Eso, digo, desde la presidencia de la República, la jefatura de gobierno de la ciudad y tal, los recorridos diarios, las asambleas semanales o quincenales o según, digo, obviamente cada nivel y escala, que también cuenta mucho lo que se mencionaba, ha sido un elemento fundamental para enfrentar estas fake news y estos discursos de odio a grado tal de que la aceptación de estos gobiernos está en más del 60%, ¿no? Es casi el 70% en el caso del presidente, pues y 60-65% en el caso de los gobiernos locales, ¿no? Entonces, a pesar de ataques, a pesar de noticias falsas, pues se enfrentan justamente a través de estos medios entre el gobernante y la población. Entre los vecinos, sin embargo, ha sido ciertamente útil una comunicación después de tener asambleas y recorridos en las calles, el tener ya un núcleo de comunicación, que también es importante generar los chats vecinales, donde de alguna manera hay una comunicación muy fluida, diaria, cotidiana, entre los gestores, ¿verdad?, de los servicios, etcétera, quienes están más a cargo, y los propios vecinos respecto a sus necesidades más directas, ¿no? Ahorita nos pidieron abrir las cámaras para vernos. O sea, eso dice que el cara a cara es muy importante. No podemos estar hablando con máquinas. O sea, eso no genera tanta confianza como aunque no nos conozcamos personalmente todavía varios, pues nos da confianza vernos la cara, estar comentando cara a cara, de tú a tú, de manera más horizontal, y yo creo que esos son elementos que ayudan para conocernos. También este diálogo, si estamos simplemente observando y nada, o sea, yo no sé ahorita cómo piensan muchos de ustedes, ¿verdad? Hasta no escucharlos y que me escuchen para conocernos y ver en qué empatamos y cómo podemos generar cosas en común. Eso yo creo que es parte de la construcción de la confianza y que nos ayuda mucho a construir, a creer en nosotros y construir juntos y reconstruir lo que se requiere, que es reconectar y reconstruir con la humanidad, con la comunidad y con la naturaleza, con nuestra madre tierra, como decimos nosotros. Necesitamos esa reconexión, esa rearticulación que nos permita ir adelante para justamente, yo digo, que este pacto para el futuro realmente funcione para todos nosotros. Sí necesitamos esa reconexión, ese diálogo, y creo que se está haciendo lo necesario frente a eso. Ahorita va a empezar acá por la cuestión electoral, justamente inicia fuertemente los ataques, todo. Solamente estar cercanos y cara a cara con la gente va a ayudar mucho para superar toda estos ataques. Y pues como decía en un libro, el futuro lo escribimos hoy. Entonces creo que es muy importante volver a hoy, desde este minuto, pues volver a reconectarnos con la humanidad, con la comunidad y la naturaleza, como decíamos, ¿no? Con estos bienes comunes. Estos tres son bienes comunes de todo el planeta que tenemos que resguardar y que tenemos que volver a construir y afianzar juntos. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Rocky. I really loved the way that you discussed that face-to-face interface and also the neighborhood chats. And so making those different levels connect. And also the fact that it's not a one-off, the fact that it's a continuous process of dialogue and engagement. And I so agree with you about how we need to make ourselves human to each other. And particularly, I think, in terms of communities where there are very high levels of fear of the other, it obviously makes a huge difference when we demystify by actually speaking with each other face to face. And so how wonderful to see you face to face, although through the technology. And thank you very much for that. And then the last formal contributor here to the space is Juma Asiago from UN Habitat Safer Cities. And I think many of us have worked with Juma on that interface between the very local and the international for decades. And I can't think of anybody who knows more about that than Juma. So Juma, I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Thank you.
So thanks, Barbara. I think it's a very useful topic, and trust for municipal safety policies and programs is quite a central pillar in the way we look at the co-production of safety and security for all. It's a pillar that really cannot be underestimated in terms of the way safety is delivered today. It's a core aspect of the governance dimension of safety processes, and one that really is underpinned by the way a city demonstrates its leadership capacities. Trust between the population and the leadership is a key dimension or a key indicator for defining the success or failure of safety policies and programs. Essentially, we look at trust as some element that really speaks to the way sustainability is going to really be defined going towards 2030, towards the 2030 goal and target. And just the way, Barbara, you defined, very much today, the big question is about the meaningfulness of consultation, the meaningfulness of participation in terms of engaging the diverse and differentiated groups in a city. And as many have seen from the ladder of participation, many processes end up being tokenistic in the absence of the trust factor playing out within those processes. It's important that when we have trust built in the process, then cities are able to leave no one behind. Cities are able to appreciate their differentiation across gender, age, and culture. And of those processes. So in that sense, I would say it's key, and it's a key dimension of what we would see as taking forward the successful delivery of safety and security policies.
Thanks so much, Juma. Really appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as I said, you have such experience of the importance of trust as a factor in all of this. And so thank you very much for bringing that perspective to us today. And then I'm going to hand over back to Emilia for the next section. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for this conversation. We are going to now show you the mural. So all the thinking that we have put together, our summary of what we have discussed today. And I understand that Claudia Ribosa from my team at the World Secretariat will be presenting that, and I understand Fernando Santomauro is also going to help us with the navigation. Claudia, it's wonderful to have you with us. Show us what we have been doing together. This square that we have been building. How does it look?
So thank you, Emilia, and thank you to all the participants for your valuable inputs that have helped us build this mural today. So, well, as mentioned earlier, there are 4 color squares, one for each entry point to unfold the pact for the future. So last week we completed the green square on commons and the red square finance and economy, and today we have completed the yellow one on trust. Tomorrow we'll be dealing with governance architecture, the blue one. So just a quick reminder before I dive into today's discussion. This is a living document, which means that you can still complete this mural after the session ends. We have already sent you the link via email, so don't hesitate to add comments. Coming back to today, we have included all the components of the methodology used in this future envisioning exercise that my colleague Adria described at the beginning. So we started by setting the scene with Adria and Emilia, and then we followed with the interactive consultation on Mentimeter, where we captured your answers to the questions. And for example, we saw with the first question that the words that come up the most when you think about trust are corruption, democracy, transparency, and dialogue. After this, we heard some inspiring remarks to build up the case on this entry point. First from Jessica Bridger, who talked about how trust is actually being challenged and falling rather than failing. And then from Carlos Moreno, who presented his own story on how he dealt with the conspiracy against the 15-minute city model and how he got help from the journalists, scientists, and mayors to counteract this. Then we moved to the contributions. So first we had Carola Gunnarsson, who talked about how fake news, hate speech, verbal and physical abuse have become the everyday experience of local and regional representatives. Then Emilio Jaton made a point on how affection and closeness with regular face-to-face exchanges in spaces such as neighborhood assemblies are key to building trust at the local level. And finally, Katie Rubin showed us how we can analyze and take a look at challenges together to understand the human experience of the problem through legislative theater and participatory processes. So the in-focus presentation, which was the next section of our exercise, was done by Jose Maria Marin, who showed us that the principles of open government can provide a solution to improve the communications and understanding between government and citizens, and thus improve the implementation of policies and processes. And finally, we got to the Agora, where we captured all your comments and your inputs using these sticky notes. And we answered to the 3 questions that Barbara Holman raised, and as well the ones that our contributors also raised during their presentations. So, for example, we had Elana Wong responding to the question on the spaces and mechanisms. We got Elana Wong talking about the importance of including migrant youth in taking them into account to build trust in these communities. Also, we got Rocío Lombera talking about, in this case, yes, mechanisms, the importance of something that might seem a bit old school, which is the face-to-face dialogue, the directness, the closeness this is very linked with what Emilio Jetón said before. And yes, well, that are some examples. We also got inputs from the chat, in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Claudia, because I know we are very short on time. We are over time, in fact. And what everybody needs to know is that we have it all here, including the things that have been shared in the chat. So thank you very much for the great job of pulling this all together, for sending the link so that people can continue contributing. Look, the use that we want you to give to Mural is we want you to have a very quick overview of the key issues that have been discussed in a very graphic manner. But these are not the only things that are going to be produced after these conversations. In fact, there have already been 2 press releases giving a snapshot of how the discussions went that have been issued for the comments and for the discussions around economy. And we will also have a vision document. The one on the comments is coming out very soon, and we will have one for each of these discussions that will be also informed by anything that you want to include in the mural that Claudia was showing to us today. So thank you again, Claudia and team, for putting this together, and thank you everybody for the contributions. Next steps on this, we will try to analyze the key issues that have come up and also see how we need to pursue these challenges or opportunities that we identify in these conversations in this vision document. And then from the vision document, we will bring this to our political leadership for discussion to determine together within the margins and within the framework, of the Executive Bureau that will take place in Brussels in June, how they are going to be shaping the content of the policy councils, which are the spaces for debate around policy in our world organization. We will also determine how it will influence the work with the town halls, and we will find areas of convergence where both town halls and policy councils will need to work on together. As you might remember, the objective is that organized civil society will become part and parcel of our deliberative mechanisms, and the policy councils are one of the key ones. So this is the architecture that we are co-creating together. And in terms of trust, and because Claudia has already reminded us of the main points that we are bringing to the table, I just want to give one perspective, which I think will be very critical in our work. We will need to differentiate between the regaining trust and the role of the political leadership and what it entails for the political leadership to play their part. But I think we will also need to think of an all of society approach to regaining trust, where the discussion with the media will be very, very critical. So let some of these ideas come back to us if new issues emerge. Give us the content that we need to make transformation happen. And for now, thank you very much for this discussion, which I found very inspiring. I have learned new things, and hopefully we will be shaping our work together in the coming weeks. This is not something for the long run only, but already in the coming weeks, we hope to be influencing our work program. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team, for a great job. And see you tomorrow if you are up for it. We will be talking about governance architecture. Thank you, everyone. Bye.